The air inside the Galleria at Oak Brook was a manufactured 72 degrees, a constant, humming chill that fought a losing battle against the Illinois summer, pressing its sweaty palms against the glass doors. For Marcus Holloway, it was a welcome reprieve. He'd spent the morning in his sun-baked garage, coaxing life back into a finicky alternator for a 2003 Honda Civic, and the thin film of grease under his fingernails felt like a second skin he couldn't quite shed. Marcus was a big man, not fat solid, the kind of solid that comes from years of hefting, transmissions, and wrestling with stubborn lug nuts. His shoulders were broad, his hands were calloused, and his face, usually open and easy with a smile, was set in a mask of quiet focus. Today, that focus was on a very specific mission, finding a birthday gift for his daughter, Chloe. Chloe was turning 10. 10, a whole decade. It felt like a milestone, a line in the sand between the little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest and the young lady who now had opinions on everything from the music in the car to the way he tied his shoes. "Daddy, you need new shoes," she'd told him just last week, looking at his worn work boots with the critical eye of a fashion editor. "Those are for the garage, not the mall." He'd laughed, ruffled her hair, and promised to try. And here he was trying. Marcus navigated the polished floors of the mall, feeling slightly out of place. He was surrounded by a sea of mannequins, dressed in clothes that looked too tight and too bright, by stores with names he couldn't pronounce and price tags that made his eyes water. He was a man of function, of things that had a purpose and a clear value. This world of aesthetic and fleeting trend was foreign territory. He found his way to a department store, the anchor at the south end of the mall. The name, Sterling's, was emblazoned in elegant, cursive gold lettering above the entrance. Inside, it was a cathedral of consumerism, with high ceilings, soft lighting, and the faint, sweet smell of 100 different perfumes colliding in the air. He wandered past the jewelry counter, where diamonds glittered under glass like trapped stars, and headed for the children's section. It was a riot of color pinks and purples, bright greens and electric blues. Chloe's favorite color was purple, a deep, royal purple. His fingers brushed against a rack of dresses, the fabric slippery and insubstantial. He was looking for something practical, something a 10-year-old could wear to school or to a friend's party. His wife, Renee, would have had a much easier time here. She knew Chloe's sizes, her unspoken preferences, the subtle difference between a dress Chloe would love and one she would merely tolerate. Marcus knew cars. He could tell you the make and model of a vehicle from the sound of its failing engine. He was useless here. He took a breath, forcing his shoulders to relax. "Ignore it, Marcus. You aren't doing anything wrong." He was a grown man, a taxpayer, a father. He had as much right to buy mangoes as anyone else in this store. He deliberately took his time, selecting two perfect mangoes, placing them in the bag, and then moving toward the checkout. He paid for his items, the purple hoodie, the 2 mangoes at a register near the front, using his debit card. He had the receipt. He had the bag. He was clean. As he walked out of the main doors of Sterling's and back into the main concourse of the mall, he felt a tiny, bitter seed of victory. He'd been watched, profiled, and he had still walked out with his head held high, his purchase legitimate, his conscience clear. He found a bench near a large indoor fountain and sat down, placing his bag beside him. He pulled out his phone, checking messages from Renee, a picture of Chloe, face painted like a butterfly, grinning at the camera. He smiled. This is what it's all about. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the water from the fountain, trying to let the tension from the Patricia woman's stare drain away. He was a good man. He worked hard. He loved his family. He was not a thief. Part 2. The tightening net. The piece lasted for about 3 minutes. The store detective in Sterling's. "Ma'am?" "Yes, that's the one. I need to report a shoplifting incident." The voice was thin, reedy, and laced with a self-righteous certainty. It was Patricia. She was standing about 20 feet away, near a potted fern, her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand holding her elbow as if she were cold. Her head was bowed, but her eyes kept darting over to Marcus, confirming her target. Marcus's stomach dropped. A cold wave washed through him. He couldn't have heard her right. Shoplifting. He had his receipt. The bag was right there. He had paid. What on earth was she talking about? He sat frozen, his body a statue of disbelief. He saw her hang up the phone, a triumphant little smirk twisting her thin lips. She smoothed down the front of her polyester uniform shirt and stood up straighter, as if she were a soldier who had just successfully called in an airstrike. A moment later, he saw him, a man in a dark, nondescript suit, with a coiled earpiece and the unmistakable, self-important gait of a mall security guard. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and his hand rested on the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt as if it were a loaded weapon. Patricia intercepted him, pointing a bony finger in Marcus's direction. Her words were too far away to hear, but her body language was a pantomime of accusation. She gestured toward the store, then back to Marcus, shaking her head with theatrical dismay. Marcus's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He could feel the blood rushing in his ears. This was not happening. This could not be happening. The security guard nodded, his jaw tight. He spoke into his radio, then began walking toward Marcus, Patricia trailing a few steps behind him like a remora attached to a shark. "Sir," the guard said, his voice flat and official as he stopped in front of Marcus, "I'm going to need you to come with me." Marcus looked up at him, trying to keep his voice calm, trying to project the innocence he knew in his soul. "What's this about? I haven't done anything wrong." "Sir, we've received a report of a theft from Sterling's department store," the guard said, his eyes scanning Marcus, assessing him as a potential threat. "We need you to come with us back to the security office to get this sorted out." Marcus stood up slowly, holding his bag up. "Look, I bought this stuff. I have a receipt right here. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." Patricia stepped forward, her voice a brittle, accusatory shard. "A misunderstanding? I saw you with my own eyes, right in the grocery section. You put those mangoes in your bag. Just slipped them right in, didn't you?" Marcus stared at her, incredulous. "And then what?" "I'm a magician. I walked through the checkout without paying. I have a receipt. Lady, check the cameras." "We will," she sneered. "Believe me, we will." The public nature of the scene was now attracting attention. A few shoppers had slowed their pace, casting curious glances. A mother pulled her child a little closer. Marcus felt the heat of humiliation rising from his collar, a furious blush that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with rage. "Ma'am, I need you to let me handle this," the guard said to Patricia, his own authority seeming threatened by her zeal. He turned back to Marcus. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Let's go have a conversation. If you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about." The lie of that statement hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Marcus knew the reality. It was a technicality that often didn't matter. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm calling my wife." He pulled out his phone. The guard stepped closer, his hand now firmly on his radio. "Sir, you have two options. You can come with me voluntarily, or I can call the Oak Brook Police Department right now. You can have this conversation with them in front of God and everybody. Your choice." The mention of the police sent a fresh wave of ice through Marcus's veins. The image of flashing lights, of handcuffs, of being put in the back of a squad car in front of all these white faces, flashed behind his eyes. He thought of his daughter. He thought of the news reports he saw every week. He thought of Philando Castillo, of George Floyd, of 100 other names that were prayers and warnings all at once. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked, his voice low and taut with fury. "You know I paid. You know I'm not a thief." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know what I saw." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You know what you think you saw. You saw a black man in your fancy store and you decided he must be stealing. That's what you saw. Her smirk returned. Believe what you want. The police will be here soon. We'll see who they believe. The door opened, and a new figure entered. He was older than the guard, heavier, with a florid complexion and a thinning comb-over. His suit was more expensive, and his name tag, unlike the others, was a small, engraved gold plate that read, "Sterling Store Management, Mr. Harrison, the manager." And he was white. Of course he was. Marcus felt the last sliver of hope die in his chest. He had seen this movie before. He knew how it ended. Part 3. The Presumption of Guilt. Mr. Harrison's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene, the nervous guard, the self-righteous Patricia, and Marcus, sitting in the chair like a defendant awaiting sentencing. He didn't ask Marcus what happened. He didn't ask to see his receipt. He didn't ask for his side of the story. His first words were directed at Patricia. "Patricia, is this the individual you reported?" His voice was a deep, officious baritone, the voice of a man used to being in charge. "Yes, Mr. Harrison," Patricia said, her voice quivering with a practiced, fragile indignation. "That's it. I saw him take the items and leave without paying." Mr. Harrison nodded gravely, as if this were the most damning testimony he had ever heard. He looked at Marcus, his expression a mask of stern disappointment. This was not the face of a man seeking the truth. This was the face of a man who had already made up his mind. "I see," Harrison said. He walked over to Marcus and, with an air of weary authority, gestured to the bag. "Is that the merchandise?" Marcus stood up slowly, his body vibrating with a rage he was struggling to contain. "This merchandise was paid for," he said, his voice shaking. "I have a receipt. I can prove it." Harrison raised a skeptical eyebrow. "May I see the receipt, sir?" Marcus fumbled in his bag, pulling out the long, thin strip of paper. He handed it to Harrison, his hands trembling. Harrison took it, his fingers touching it like it was a piece of evidence from a crime scene. He squinted at it, his lips moving as he read the items. He said, "This shows a purchase for a youth hoodie and two mangoes." "That's right," Marcus said. "That's what's in the bag. That's what I paid for." Harrison looked from the receipt to the bag, then back to Marcus. "This receipt doesn't specify the type of mangoes, does it? Our store carries several varieties. It's possible the items in your bag are not the ones on this receipt. Perhaps you paid for the cheaper ones and took the more expensive ones." The accusation was so absurd, so pathetically thin, that Marcus could only stare at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? They're mangoes. I picked two mangoes. I gave them to the cashier. She rang them up." Harrison's face tightened. "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone. You are in enough trouble as it is." "Trouble?" Marcus echoed, his voice rising. "I haven't done anything. I came into this store to buy a gift for my daughter's birthday, and I am being treated like a common criminal. This woman has been following me and glaring at me since I walked in, and now she's making up lies. And you're just taking her word for it." Patricia let out a theatrical gasp. "Lies? I would never." The argument was interrupted by a knock on the door. A uniformed police officer stepped into the already crowded office. His name badge read Officer K. Miller. He was white, with a buzz cut and a face that seemed to have forgotten how to smile. His eyes did a quick, professional scan of the room, and his hand rested casually on his belt near his holster. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if the air had been sucked out. Marcus felt his chest constrict. The sight of the uniform, the badge, the gun, it triggered a primal fear that was both ancient and immediate. His ancestors had been here before. He was here now. The landscape changed, the laws changed, but the fear was a constant, a toxic inheritance. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Miller asked, his voice a monotone. Mr. Harrison took charge, presenting himself as the reasonable, aggrieved party. "Officer, thank you for coming. We've had an incident. This individual," he said, nodding toward Marcus, "was observed by our associate, Patricia, taking items from our store without paying for them." Patricia nodded vigorously, her hands clasped in front of her like a schoolgirl reciting a lesson. "That's right. Officer, I saw him take two mangoes from the produce display and put them in a bag. He then left the store without paying. Officer Miller's gaze shifted to Marcus. It was a cold, assessing look. He was a tall, broad black man, easily 6'2". He looked strong. He looked angry. And in that moment, he was everything the officer had been trained to see as a threat. Is that true? Miller asked. No, it is not true, Marcus said, forcing himself to speak slowly, clearly. I paid for everything in this bag. I have a receipt. I can show you. He held out the receipt again. Officer Miller took it, his eyes scanning it without much interest. He handed it back. The manager says you might have switched the fruit. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, Marcus said, the frustration and fear now boiling over into his voice. Why would I do that? For $1? This is harassment. This is racial profiling. They saw a black man in their store, and they decided I must be a thief. The word racist hung in the air. Officer Miller's face hardened. Sir, let's not use that kind of language. What kind of language? The truth. Marcus shot back. Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down, Miller said, his hand now more firmly on his belt. I am calm, Marcus yelled, his voice anything but. I am being accused of a crime I didn't commit. Look, the officer said, his tone becoming more aggressive. We got a call about a shoplifter. You fit the description. Now, you can either cooperate, or I can put you in cuffs, and we can sort this out down at the station. Your choice. The words were a hammer blow. The implied violence, the ease with which this could escalate, was terrifying. Marcus saw the gleam of the handcuffs on Miller's belt. He saw Patricia's smug face. He saw Harrison's stern, unwavering gaze. He was a lone black man in a room full of white faces, and the entire machinery of the state was arrayed against him. And his only crime was being black. I want to see the security footage, Marcus said, his voice a low, desperate plea. Just check the cameras. You'll see I'm telling the truth. Oh, we'll check the cameras, Harrison said, but his voice was dismissive. We'll conduct a full investigation. But for now, I think it's best if you cooperate with Officer Miller. Miller stepped toward Marcus, his hands now moving to his handcuffs. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. What? No. Marcus stumbled back, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. I'm not under arrest. You can't do this. I can and I will if you don't stop resisting, Miller barked, his voice now cold and commanding. Turn around. The world seemed to narrow to a single, terrifying point. Marcus saw his life flash before his eyes, not the whole of it, but the future, his daughter growing up without a father, his wife becoming a widow, the headlines. Black man shot during mall shoplifting incident. The fear was a physical thing, a cold, metallic taste in his mouth. But in the heart of that fear, a small, stubborn ember of rage refused to die. He was not going to let them do this to him. He was not going to be their easy narrative. He was not going to be the next hashtag. No, he said again, his voice finding a core of steel. I am not resisting, but I am not putting my hands behind my back. I am a citizen. I have rights. I want to see the video. I want to call a lawyer. I am not moving from this spot until my lawyer is here. The standoff was complete. Marcus, a mountain of a man, his hands held up in a gesture of non-compliance, faced Officer Miller, whose hand was now resting on the grip of his taser. The air crackled with tension. Any wrong move, any twitch, could be the spark that ignited the powder keg. Last chance, Miller said, his voice low. Marcus just shook his head, his jaw set, his eyes blazing. He wasn't going to back down. He would not be a compliant victim. It was then that the door to the office, which had been slightly ajar, was pushed open. A young black woman in a Sterling's uniform peeked in. It was Talia, the sales associate who had helped him. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene: the police officer, the manager, Patricia, and Marcus, standing with his hands raised. Mr. Harrison, Talia said, her voice hesitant. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just heard you were talking about the man who bought the mangoes. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. Not now, Talia. We have a situation. But sir, Talia persisted, her voice gaining strength. I think there might be a misunderstanding. I'm the one who checked him out. He bought a purple hoodie and two mangoes. He paid for everything. I saw him. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt a wave of dizzying relief, but it was quickly followed by a surge of pure, white-hot anger. He had been telling the truth. Of course he had. But it had taken another personal witness to make his truth matter. Mr. Harrison's face flushed a deep red. He looked from Talia to Patricia, who suddenly seemed to shrink in on herself. Patricia, is this true? Patricia's face was a mask of panic. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. Well, I didn't see him at the register. I just saw him by the fruit, and then he was gone. I just assumed. You assumed, Officer Miller said, his voice flat. He looked at Patricia, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze shifted to Marcus, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than suspicion in his eyes. It might have been embarrassment. It might have been the cold realization of what he'd almost done. He slowly moved his hand away from his taser. You have a receipt, and you have a witness who confirms you paid, Miller said to Marcus. His voice was still flat, but the edge of command was gone. It looks like there's been a mistake. A mistake. Marcus's voice was a roar of pent-up fury. You were about to handcuff me. You were about to arrest me for buying fruit for my daughter. Because of her. He pointed a trembling finger at Patricia, who flinched as if he'd thrown a spear. And you call that a mistake? Sir, I understand you're upset, Miller began. You have no idea what I am, Marcus snarled. He turned to Harrison. And you were ready to throw me to the wolves. You didn't even ask me one question. You saw a black man and a crying white woman and you made up your mind. What kind of manager are you? Harrison had the decency to look abashed. This is a very serious situation. We will be conducting a full internal review. I can assure you. Conduct all the reviews you want, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a cold, dangerous whisper. I'm calling my lawyer. And the news. This is not over. He turned and looked at Officer Miller. Can I go now? Or am I still under suspicion? Miller shifted his weight, his eyes avoiding Marcus's. You're free to go, he said, the words tasting like defeat. Marcus didn't wait for another word. He snatched his bag from the floor, pushed past Miller, past Harrison, past the cowering Patricia, and out the door. He walked down the service corridor, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He walked until he was back in the main concourse of the mall, back under the soft, forgiving lights, surrounded by shoppers who had no idea of the small war that had just been fought and won in the back rooms of Sterling's. He found a bench and sat down, his entire body trembling. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow, shaky exhaustion. He had won. They had not arrested him. They had not shot him. He was free to go. But the victory felt hollow. The fear, the humiliation, the sheer, soul-crushing weight of being treated as less than human, it would not leave him. It would cling to him, a dark shadow, for the rest of his life. He was a free man, but he was also a marked one. He always had been. Part 4. The unraveling. The aftermath was a slow, grinding affair. Marcus did call his lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Angela Davis, no relation. She always joked, but the name carried weight. He also called his wife, Renee. He told her what happened, his voice flat and tired. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then a sharp, pained intake of breath. Oh, Marcus, she whispered. Oh, baby. He could hear the fear in her voice, the same fear he had felt in that room. It was the fear of the phone call in the middle of the night, the knock on the door, the worst-case scenario made real. It was a fear that lived in the bones of every black family in America. I'm okay, he said, the words feeling hollow. I'm not hurt. I'm coming home, she said. I'm getting Chloe and we're coming home. He didn't argue. He wanted them close. He wanted to hold his daughter and feel the simple, pure reality of her, to remind himself what was real and what mattered. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and meetings. Angela Davis, his lawyer, was a force of nature. She did not believe in quiet settlements or signing non-disclosure agreements. She believed in public accountability. "This isn't just about you, Marcus," she told him, her eyes burning with righteous fury. "This is about every black man who's ever been followed around a store, everyone who's been pulled over for driving while black, everyone who's had the cops called on him for just existing. We're going to make them see this." And she did. She demanded the security footage. The Ma, under pressure from her and from the news outlets she had contacted, complied. The footage was damning. It showed Marcus, calm and unassuming, browsing the mangoes. It showed Patricia, lurking in the background, her gaze fixed on him with a predator's intensity. It showed him walking to the register, handing his items to Talia, paying with his card, and taking his receipt. It was a perfect, step-by-step refutation of Patricia's entire story. But there was more. Angela Davis, along with a private investigator she had hired, dug into Patricia's history. It turned out this was not the first time she had made a false accusation. There had been 2 other incidents at other stores, both involving black men, both quietly dismissed after security footage proved them false. The pattern was undeniable. The woman was a serial liar, and her lies had a very specific target. The discovery changed everything. It shifted the narrative from unfortunate misunderstanding to rushily motivated false accusation. The story was picked up by the local news, then the national news. The name Sterling's was suddenly synonymous with racial profiling. Protests were organized outside the mall. The company's stock price dipped. The corporate office, which had initially tried to circle the wagons, was forced to do a complete reversal. They fired Patricia. They fired Mr. Harrison. They issued a public apology to Marcus, full of flowery language about their commitment to diversity and inclusion. They offered him a settlement, a substantial one. But the story didn't end there. The public pressure had turned a spotlight on Patricia, and the internet, as it does, began to do its own digging. Anonymous users on social media began to piece together a more complex and more pathetic picture of her life. Public records revealed she was, as Marcus had guessed, middle-aged and divorced. She lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of town with 2 cats. Her social media profiles, before she deleted them, were wasteland of bitter posts about her ex-husband, about the injustice of her life, and, disturbingly, a few cryptic, rambling posts about a man she had met, a man who didn't return her affections. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when a former coworker of Patricia's, a woman who claimed she was coming forward out of a sense of moral duty, gave an anonymous interview to a local blogger. Patricia was obsessed with him, the coworker said, the tall black man who came into the store. She'd talk about him all the time. She'd wait for him to come in. She said he was different and respectful, and she thought he was interested in her. It was, and professional, to say the least. The coworker continued. One day he came in to buy a gift, I think. She tried to help him, to be extra nice, maybe flirt a little, and he was polite, but he wasn't interested. He was just there to buy something for his daughter. You could see it on her face when he left. She was humiliated, furious. She said something like, "Who does he think he is, rejecting me?" And then, well, the next thing we knew, the police were there. The revelation was like a bomb going off. The story was no longer just about a racist system. It was about a spurned white woman who had used the power of that racist system as a weapon against a black man who had the audacity to simply not be interested in her. It was a tale as old as America itself, the toxic intersection of racism and fragile white womanhood. The news cycle went into overdrive. Pundits argued, activists raged. The name Patricia became a national byword for a particular kind of petty, dangerous bigotry. Marcus, who had tried to stay out of the spotlight, was suddenly a symbol. He received an outpouring of support, but also threats. He was seen as a hero by some, a traitor by others. Through it all, he tried to keep his